I was in the middle of my date with AP when my husband showed up, and then it was total chaos.
Infidelity is one thing, but having security kick me, my husband, and my AP out of a restaurant because my husband showed up to confront me about cheating is insane. My name is Danielle. I'm a 27 years old female from Houston. I'm married to Theo, a 31-year-old banker. Theo and I have been married for almost 3 years now, and I've been cheating for almost 6 months. I got caught very fast, and the situation is out of hand. Honestly, I never saw myself committing adultery ever in my life, but things changed, and I did it anyway. I'm not a gold digger who just lays around the house and expects money from her husband. I am not a housewife either. I also work. I run a thrift store with 3 of my friends. It's a joint business, and before you guess, yes, I met my AP Dan through my thrift business. But before we head into the genesis of our forbidden relationship, I'll tell you about my marriage. Theo and I have been friends for years, even before we got married, but best friends, but we knew of each other and hung out together once in a while. He's 4 years older than me and has views quite different from mine. I love to be outgoing and social, but Theo is the exact opposite. Despite our differences, we actually made our marriage work, and it has been great. Well, it had been great till I lost my self-control and cheated on him. I know he will never forgive me for what I did, and that just makes me feel a lot guiltier than I want to feel. Theo and I leave for work together. In fact, he drops me off before going to his workplace. My friends and I have a very specific system of business, and that way, we share days of the week among ourselves in order to keep everything running. I usually head Mondays and Tuesdays, so on a certain Monday morning about 9 months ago, I met Dan. I had no idea that the tall, attractive man walking into our store with his sister would end up being the reason I ended my marriage. The first thing I noticed when he walked in was how handsome he was. He's tall too, and I've always had a thing for tall guys. Theo is tall too, but Dan is significantly taller than Theo. Aside from his height, there's nothing good about him. He's not too muscular or big. I was instantly drawn to his brown eyes and the way he was so supportive of his sister as she walked around the store trying to find something nice to hit. The moment I noticed my attraction for him, I tried my best to avoid him as much as possible, but that was impossible because I was in charge on Mondays and Tuesdays, and since it was a Monday, I had no choice but to take over and do my job. His sister kept on asking for his opinion, so he was literally with her throughout, and that automatically made the both of us speak. After his sister went into the changing room to try what she picked, we were left alone. He approached me and asked for my name. I swear that I didn't want to tell him my real name, but I felt like we might never even meet again, so it was probably best to just tell him my name. We introduced ourselves, and then his sister came out. After some time, they paid and left. I forgot all about the encounter and went on with my life like nothing happened. That same day, Theo came to pick me up after work. Normally, I would tell him all about my day and what happened, but on that particular day, I just didn't add in the fact that a handsome tall man walked into the store with his sister. I didn't add it because I felt it was a useless detail considering the fact that it might have been a one-time meeting. 3 weeks after that meeting, Dan walked into the store with his sister again. I had to do a double take because I couldn't believe that I was seeing him again. Trust me, guys, I had forgotten all about our encounter. So when I saw him, it was a very surprising thing. Notwithstanding, I welcomed them and helped with their shopping experience like I usually did. While I was waiting for his sister to pick something, he pulled me to the side and asked to have it with me. I agreed immediately because I actually thought it was business talk, but it ended up being something else. Can you believe he told me that he had been trying to reach me for 3 weeks? Yes, he actually came to the store looking for me, but he didn't see me. I was surprised because I never imagined that the same man I saw and found attractive had been trying to get a hold of me all those while. He came on Fridays for 3 weeks straight, but I usually didn't come to work on Friday. Can you also believe that he came alone looking for me, but pretends like he wanted to get a gift for his sister? It finally made sense because none of my friends mentioned that anyone was looking for me. He told me he never asked, just looked around the store. Dan told me that he decided to bring his sister again on a Monday in hopes that he would see me, and he did. At that moment, I didn't know how to feel. Honestly, it was literally a lot to take in at that point. Honestly, I was mostly excited. I know that's shameful, but I can't lie about it. I liked the idea of someone going through such lengths just to see me, and yes, the fact that he was attracted added to it. A part of me tried to remind me that if he went to such lengths just to see me, he probably wanted something, but I didn't care. The physical attraction I had for him kind of blurred my sense of reasoning. Before he left that day, he casually asked for my phone number. Instead of giving it to him right away, I told him he could have it when he next came to the store. Yes, I did that intentionally so I could see him again. After he left the store, I knew I was getting myself into something crazy. My common sense tried to warn me, but I told myself a little flirting won't hurt. It was exciting to think about, and that excitement was more than the fear I felt, so I rolled with it. Just like I did the last time, I omitted the fact that I spoke to Dan when Theo came to pick me up and asked about my day. Theo didn't notice anything was off because it was still early in the relationship. It wasn't even a relationship at that point. Dan and I just met twice at that point, and I swear that I didn't imagine us getting together at all. The next Monday, Dan actually walked into the store by himself. He didn't bring his sister along like he did the first 2 times we met. "Can I have your number now?" That was the first thing he said when he walked into the store. I was impressed with his direct approach, so I gave him my number immediately he asked. He told me he had to go for a meeting, so he had to leave early. After he left, he was all I could think about. I tried to fight it off, but nothing worked. I knew it was wrong to think of another man as a married woman, but the temptation outweighed all the restrictions I tried to have. 2 hours later, Dan texted me. I can still remember how excited I was when I saw his text. The fact that I was even that excited is what scared me. I chatted him back, and that's how I spent the day. He was flirtatious from the beginning and didn't try to hide it. His texts were direct, and he didn't beat around the bush. I liked that about him, and we continued to talk. As we all know, karma has a way of giving a dangerous warning before it finally strikes. Theo noticed some days later that I spent more time on my phone. That usually never happened because I hardly used my phone. I'm the type of person that loves being present rather than always being on my phone. That's why it was easy for Theo to notice that I loved being on my phone suddenly. Of course, I knew it would be difficult to hide the fact that I chatted with Dan from him, but I never saw his questions coming. I swear that it was difficult to defend myself when he asked me that question on our way home. He even went as far as asking me to show him what piqued my interest so much. I instantly got anxious and sweat started to form on my head. I tried to change the topic, but Theo was adamant and he asked to see my phone. At that moment, I actually thought it was over for me and I would get caught. But I was able to get out of that decision by accusing him of not trusting me. I told him I was just looking at new designs that would look good in the thrift store. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further either. My Reddit family, that moment in the car, opened my eyes to a lot of things. It made me realize that I was actually hiding a secret from my husband. I realized that the text between me and Dan had to be so bad if I didn't want Theo to know about it. I smelled trouble right away, and my mind told me to cut Dan off and stop chatting with him. But I brushed the thoughts off and just told myself that the best thing to do was be careful from them on. Big things start small, guys. Always keep that in your mind. I realized this abruptly too. I realized that my relationship with Dan started small and was advancing into a cheating scandal when he texted me and suggested we have lunch together weeks later. I didn't tell him I was married or that I was in a relationship of any kind. I kept that piece of information away from him because I initially thought I'd flirt with him, pass time, and then cut him off. But when he asked us to go out for lunch, I promised myself never to tell him I'm married. Call me whatever you want, but I do not care. I'm just relaying everything that happened at that moment. I didn't want Dan to know I'm married for any reason. That is besides the fact, by the way. About lunch, yes, I skipped work to go to lunch with him. It was a simple lunch, and we mostly spoke through it. Even though things seemed to be going slow, I could already tell that I was falling for Dan. I could tell that I was getting obsessed with him. From the texts to the calls and then the lunch, I was in trouble and I knew it. Dan, on the other hand, was doing a lot. He's confident and always direct. He flirted openly and didn't try to choose his words. Though, I don't blame him for any of that. I never gave him a reason to choose his words because I never told him I was married. Before I go on, I'd like to ask, what's your own definition of cheating? Because for me, you don't cheat until you actually have sexual relations with another person. The texts, calls, and dates didn't feel like cheating to me. At that point, 8 didn't have any guilt because I believed that I wasn't doing anything wrong. We didn't have sex yet, so I believed I was clean. The only reason I didn't want Theo to catch me then was because I knew he'd read something different into everything. But our lack of sexual relations didn't last forever. Eventually, I actually slept with Dan and officially committed adultery. So, it happened on a Saturday about 5 or 6 months ago. Dan finally invited me to his house. All the while we were chatting, he'd never asked me to come to his house before. He actually courted me like it was a real relationship. He had no idea he was speaking to a married woman. I never brought up my marriage to him. I will be honest, Dan was very respectful. He did things a real boyfriend would do. He never brought me to his house for several weeks. When he finally asked me to come, I didn't hesitate. At that point, I was already 100% smitten with him in every form. I was literally obsessed, and I believed I had fallen for him. The infatuation was so strong that I lost my common sense and self-control. When I got to his house, I didn't act like a married woman with a husband at home waiting for her at all. I acted single and free, and I did things I'm too ashamed to talk about. I actually sneaked out of the house and didn't tell Theo I was going anywhere. I also switched off my phone because I didn't want him to call me or disturb me. I usually did that anytime I went out with Dan. It was my way of making sure Dan never found out the truth. So, while I was at Dab's house, I cooked for him, and after that, we watched a movie and started making out halfway through the movie. It was a slow burn thing, and I enjoyed it. From kissing and fondling, things got heated, and then we went to his bedroom. I had zero hesitations, and we slept together. But the guilt did come after everything happened. I got sick of myself because it was at that moment I realized that I cheated on my husband. Before, it felt like I was just flirting, but the sexual relationship made it feel so real, and it registered in my head that I had committed adultery. I felt bad, so bad that I gave Dan a lame excuse so I could leave. When I left, I didn't have the balls to go back home. I knew I couldn't bear to look my husband in the eye after what I did. What would he say? What would he do? Will he notice even if I don't tell him? These were the questions that ran through my mind as I sat on the sidewalk. I was already 2 blocks away from the house, but I couldn't bring myself to go on. I waited till it was extremely late in the night, and I was sure that Theo was asleep before I sneaked in and had a shower. I had to scrub my body roughly because I feared he could smell Dan on me. It was a stupid thought, but taking a shower helped. I slept in the living room because I couldn't bring myself to sleep next to Theo. The next morning, Theo woke me up angrily. He was extremely angry, and he didn't even try to hide his anger. At first, I got scared because I didn't know why he was angry. I suspected that he found out I cheated already, so I literally started shaking. Theo confronted me about leaving the house without letting him know, and also turning off my phone. His words took me by surprise, and though I was relieved that he didn't know I cheated, I was also left speechless. It was hard to pretend like nothing happened, but I had to do that in order to keep my marriage. I could barely look him in the eye as I tried to make up excuses about where I was and what I did. But none of it seemed to make sense. Before I could finish defending the first accusations, he asked why I didn't sleep on the bed the night before. Theo was sincerely concerned, and I could tell with the way he looked at me that he was disappointed. That's what made me feel worse. The fact that he didn't even know what I did yet, he was already disappointed. I am literally pulling my hair as I write this now. I didn't see it then, but now that I'm narrating it, I know I messed up big time. Theo cared about me so much, and he never hid that from me. But now, he doesn't want to see my face or have anything to do with me. Theo asked if there was anything wrong, and I made up the excuse of having issues at work that I had to sort out. I also said I didn't sleep in the room because I was so tired that I slept off on the couch in the living room. After telling him that, he didn't press further. He just asked me never to switch off my phone before leaving the house again. And then he asked me what issues I had at work. He was genuinely concerned, so I made up stories and told him things that never happened. I knew deep down that he wasn't buying any of the stories, but he pretended to be okay with the things I said anyway. I knew he wasn't done, but I was thankful he left it there. So after that, I still ended up at Dan's house again. He texted me to ask why I left abruptly, and even though I made up excuses, he asked to see me. I ignored him for 2 weeks, but he was persistent and showed up at the store. I had to tell him to leave early because Theo had promised to take me out that same day. Dan almost didn't want to leave, but I made sure he exited the store. Even after all these, I got infatuated with him, our texts and calls again, and I ended up on his bed some days later. I slept with him again, and continuously did over the past 4 months. But last month, my life, my extramarital affair, and my marriage all literally took a turn for the worse. Last month, Dan asked me to go to dinner with him. He told me he wanted us to do something different since we never had dinner before and always had lunch. I said no several times, but then he started getting suspicious and he got angry, so I agreed. I knew having dinner would be risky because it would get late, but I didn't want Dan to get upset, but I had to say yes because I didn't want him to suspect anything. He took me to a completely different restaurant for dinner that day, but we had no idea that would be the end of our relationship. Even before we got our food, Dan already started kissing me and we started making out. The food took a while to get there before we finally started eating. Dan said he wanted us to spend a long time there and I agreed. I was already thinking of the excuses to give Theo when I got home. After almost 2 hours at the restaurant, the worst possible thing happened. Someone touched me from behind, and when I looked up, my husband, Theo, was standing there. My heart almost leaked out of my chest when I saw him. He was the last person on earth that I expected to catch me there. "So this is why you've been sneaking out. You're cheating on me," Theo said angrily. I remember his words clearly. I was so shocked that I got up and tried to pull him outside. Dan didn't know I was married, and Theo didn't know Dan. My mind was a mess, so I tried to defuse the situation, but nothing worked. Theo refused to move. He started cursing me out and calling me a disgusting cheat in front of everyone. People started staring, and I wished to be swallowed by the ground. Dan had no idea what was going on, so he stood up to defend me. Before I knew what was happening, Theo and Dan were in a heated exchange. Dan almost punched Theo when he said he was married to me, and he called Dan my plaything. Dan refused to believe Theo, and before I knew it, the both of them were cursing each other. Theo then faced me and told me the marriage was over. G called me a cheater and accused me of being a loose woman. Dan tried to push Theo away, and that's how they ended up getting physical. For the first time in my life, I was grabbed by security and thrown out of a restaurant. Same thing happened to Dan and Theo because the restaurant felt like we were disrupting the orderliness inside. While outside, Theo grabbed my purse and snatched my ring. It was almost as if he knew I would hide it. After that, he left. Dan was shocked and asked me if I was really married. I finally told him the truth, but before I could explain, he left. He has since blocked me and blocks me anytime I call with another phone number. Theo threw me out of the house and told me to expect divorce soon. Update. My Reddit family, my life has been hell. I'm here to update you all on what has been going on. So, Dan and I have not seen or spoken since the restaurant incident. I can't believe I lost Theo and risked our marriage for that man-child. Just after what happened, he cut me off without waiting to hear from me. I find that completely immature. I'm here going through all this, and he has a loved one? Sick. Theo, on the other hand, sent me divorce papers 6 months ago. I tried my best to beg him, but he refused. I would be a fool not to recognize the fact that he has always cared for me and put me first. I regret losing our marriage, and it haunts me every day. A lot of you have been wondering how he suddenly showed up at the restaurant. Well, brace yourselves, because it's not something I expected. Can you believe that it was his friend who worked as a server at that restaurant that called him and told him I was kissing a stranger in the restaurant? I had no idea he had a friend there. I had to beg Theo to tell me how he knew where I was that night. The fact that Dan and I were involved in PDA even made matters worse. I lost my sense of reasoning, but in my defense, I had no idea he had a friend that worked there. I know a lot of his friends attended our wedding though, but I never spoke to them long enough to know if anyone worked in a restaurant, or I would have had my guard up. Theo hates me with everything in him. I wanted to keep the house at least, but he has refused to give me the house or a penny. His lawyers are fighting hard to make sure I get nothing from him. Since we have no children, it's literally a lost cause. I do regret everything I did because I know I messed up and lost a real man just to have useless fun. The guilt keeps eating me up, but I know it's my karma. Theo gave me the benefit of doubt, but I let him down. I'm disappointed in myself too. I should have done better.
I am here to dump my feelings after what my husband did to me and my lover after finding out about our affair. I don't think it was fair on his part to treat us this way, even though we were wrong. I did not know that my husband could turn into such a beast and become a completely different person. I feel overwhelmed by the betrayal and hurt caused by his actions. I never expected him to react in such a violent and aggressive manner, making me question everything about our relationship. My name is Adeline, age 37, married to James, age 41, for 12 years. We have a 10-year-old, and our life has taken a 360 after having a baby. We had been a compatible couple, but we were never a lovey-dovey one. We had been quite practical in our approach towards our marriage. We never were the kind of people who liked showing affection, and as it was a very convenient marriage, we never once thought of ourselves as the romantic type anyway. Our focus has always been on building a stable and secure life for our family. However, after having a baby, I realized the importance of nurturing our relationship and making time for each other amidst the chaos of parenthood. I could see how having a loving partner would have helped me deal with postpartum and all the new changes in my life. I tried to reason with James about how I was feeling and how maybe a little support from him could help me get out of the rut I was in. We had a very long conversation about it, and even after explaining to him that I was feeling so lost and lonely, James said that our relationship had always been lacking affection, so he suddenly could not become a romantic. I felt hurt and disappointed by his response, as I had hoped for understanding and comfort during a difficult time. It became clear to me that our relationship was not meeting my emotional needs, leading me to reevaluate what I truly needed in a partner. I realized very soon after becoming a mother that I should be expecting minimal support from James in raising our baby and expecting him to be an available father. It was as if I was a one-man show being responsible for everything around the house. I was always tired and exhausted and felt like I was a hamster on a wheel, always trying to catch up but never reaching a destination. I tried to communicate my feelings and needs to James, but it seemed like he was not willing to change or provide more support. Eventually, I had to accept that I needed to prioritize self-care and seek out other sources of support in order to maintain my own well-being while caring for our baby. He told me that earning a living is not something easy, and I should be grateful that I did not have to do that as well. He was providing for the family, and that should be his greatest contribution. I was both shocked and dumbstruck at his high ground that he had taken just by earning a living. I had decided after that day that I would never share my feelings with James anymore. If this was the response I would be getting, then it was better to talk to a shrink than to expect James to understand. It had been 2 years raising a kid on my own, and as usual, James was just our cash machine in all these years. I realized that relying on James for emotional support was not realistic, and seeking professional help might be a better option for me. Despite his financial contributions, I needed more than just financial assistance to navigate the challenges of single parenthood. I went out to meet my friends after a long time. It was like some sort of a reunion to catch up with everyone after college, to know what everyone was up to. I was really excited to meet and know what had been happening in everyone else's lives. I had been living under a rock after my marriage, and this looked like a good enough reason to get out of the house. As we sat down and started sharing stories, I realized how much I had missed these moments of laughter and connection. It felt refreshing to be surrounded by familiar faces and hear about all the adventures my friends had been on since we last met. I was the sexy and cool person in college, but now I could see that everyone was independent and confident. I felt very small when I said that all I did was get married and have a kid. Everyone was shocked to see the way they mocked me and told me that I was just throwing away my life. I looked much older than I actually was. They all talked about how supportive their husbands and partners were who helped them with house chores and raising the kids. They asked me if James was an available partner. I lied through my teeth about him being super supportive and always understanding of my needs. Deep down, I knew the truth about my relationship with James, but I couldn't bear to admit it to myself, let alone to these judgmental women. My facade of a perfect marriage was beginning to crack under the weight of their expectations. After coming home, I cried my eyes out, reliving the pain and how I was just throwing my life away. I decided to take matters into my own hands when our son turned 3. I put him into a boarding school and decided to focus on my own self. I was 30, but I looked like 50 and felt like I was 60 years old. I realized that I needed to prioritize my mental and physical well-being in order to be the best parent for my son. Taking that step was difficult, but ultimately necessary for both of us to thrive. I knew that James would just agree to anything I said about how to bring up our kid. I felt like he did not even want to have this child, but he had no choice, as we got to know about me being pregnant too late, and there was nothing we could do about it. I did not know if that was the reason why he was so disconnected with our son. I had a discussion with James, and I made it clear to him that either our son goes into a boarding school or he would have to help in homeschooling him. I knew that James would never be willing to take the latter option. I portrayed to him that as he was the intelligent one among the two of us, he should be the one helping and teaching life lessons to our child. I knew that this would work like a charm and help him let me decide what was best for our son. Finally, James gave in and told me to do what I think is best for him and his future. I was relieved that James had agreed to my plan, knowing that our son's education and well-being were in good hands. With his support, I could now confidently make the decision to enroll our son in a boarding school for a more structured and focused learning environment. I was happy to have accomplished the first step in changing my life. Now it was time for me to use my education and find a job to be independent. I decided to do it in secret without James getting to know about it. Once I got a job, that is when I decided to break the news to him. I wanted to see that shocked expression on his face when he would realize that he was not the sole bread earner in the family. I wanted to prove to him that I was better than him. I could take care of the house and also earn money at the same time. I wanted to show him that I was capable of contributing financially and not just relying on him. It was important for me to establish my own independence and show him that I could be successful on my own terms. It was a difficult task to find a job, but I was determined to do it. After a few lows and no responses, I finally heard from a small company who was willing to hire me even without experience. I was jumping with joy after finishing the call with them. Finally, I would be able to be independent and on my own after such a long time. I eagerly accepted the job offer and began preparing for my new role with enthusiasm. This opportunity was a stepping stone towards achieving my long-term career goals. After all the documentation was in place, I told James about me starting to work, as I had a lot of free time now with our son at boarding school. He definitely looked shocked at my sudden news. Very soon, he changed his expressions and told me that he was glad and happy that I was trying to become independent. I could clearly see that he was not very happy with it, but he also knew that he had no say in any of this. I assured him that I would still be available to help out with our son whenever needed, and that this new job would only enhance our family's financial stability. James eventually came around and offered his support, recognizing the importance of my personal growth and career development. I taunted him by saying that I knew my responsibilities and I knew how to juggle multiple things at the same time, unlike a few other people I knew. As soon as I started working, I realized how much I missed being myself and dressing up. I felt confident and strong. I could see the boost in morale working gave me, and within a few months, I became a part of my team who relied on me in making important decisions. I felt like I belonged here. Being with James did not bring as much joy in my life as being at work. I enjoyed being heard and valued. My feelings and opinions mattered, and that was something that had not happened to me in a long time. I found fulfillment in my career that I hadn't experienced before, and it made me realize the importance of pursuing my own passions and goals. This newfound sense of purpose brought a sense of contentment and satisfaction that I had been missing in my personal life. One of my colleagues at work had suggested that I join a gym that would help me be both mentally and physically at my peak performance. I told her that I would think about it and let her know. She said that I would look even younger once I started working out, which made me think that maybe this would be another addition to my daily routine, which could help me stay as out of sight from James as possible. I ultimately decided to give it a try and signed up for a gym membership. I realized that not only did it improve my physical health, but also gave me a much-needed mental break from work stress. James had suddenly started complaining about food and me not being able to keep up with the house chores. I told him that now that I had my hands full, it would be better if he would try to take care of his things at least to keep up with the work piling on for the weekends. He looked irritated when I suggested he do a little work around the house. I was ready to flip at him if he would try to argue about it. It was not just my house, it was his as well. He had every right to keep it clean. I was no more the docile housewife who would just shut up and listen to everything thrown her way. I needed him to step up and take responsibility for his share of the household chores. If he wanted a clean and organized home, he needed to contribute just as much as I did. It was time for him to realize that we were equal partners in this relationship. I did not enjoy going to the gym and was about to quit it, but the thought of James made me be remotivated to start gym again after being frustrated with James. This is when my life took a drastic turn. In a few weeks, I started dating this young guy who I met in the gym. Initially, it was just harmless flirting that we enjoyed. I could see that every day when I walked in, he would check my body, and I enjoyed the way he could not take his eyes off my body. Initially, it was just a thrill that I enjoyed with the way he looked at me. But as we spent more time together, I realized there was a genuine connection beyond physical attraction. Our conversations were deep and meaningful, and I found myself opening up to him in ways I never had before. This unexpected relationship with him helped me see that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them. He was very different from James. He laughed at my jokes and tried to understand if I had something to say. I enjoyed being with him, and my weekends were dedicated to spending time with him. I knew that being at home with James would only drain me out, so I made sure to stay as occupied as possible. I appreciated his genuine interest in me and our conversations, which made me feel valued and understood. It was a refreshing change from the draining dynamic I had experienced with James, and I looked forward to our time together. We went out clubbing one day, and we were so drunk. Things got a little out of hand as we started making out in the club itself. We could not resist keeping our hands off of each other and made our way to the washrooms where we made out. I felt like I was back in college doing silly things. It was so much fun, though. I felt alive and did something crazy after such a long time that it felt really awesome. The thrill of being spontaneous and carefree was exhilarating, and it brought back a sense of youthfulness and excitement. It was a night to remember, full of laughter and unforgettable memories. After that day, our relationship had taken a turn, and we were no longer just looking at each other's body and enjoying it from a distance. We would make out at any chance we got, either at the gym, in the changing rooms or shower, or even in the car. We could not stop touching each other every time we met. I could feel that I was slowly falling for this guy. He was the kind of person I wanted in my life, who was supportive and loved me both physically and emotionally. Our connection went beyond just physical attraction, and I found myself opening up to him in ways I never had before. It was clear that our bond was deepening, and I couldn't deny the growing feelings I had for him. James had texted me one day that he would be out for a meeting which would take him too long. It was a long drive back home, so he would just sleep in at the hotel and get back home the next day. I knew James hated driving at night, so it was something he would have done. I decided to use this time to my advantage and call Ray, my lover, home for a sleepover. We never ever spent a day in a decent bed. It was always cramped up spaces where we made out. I was super thrilled to spend an entire night with Ray in a bed, and that too in my own house. I spoke to Ray and asked him to come to meet me in the evening so that we could have a romantic getaway at my place. He looked equally enthusiastic about it and could not wait to be with me. I ordered food as I did not want to bother with cooking and waste time and all the unnecessary stuff. I made sure to pull out my best sexy outfit to entice him once he came home. We both pounced on each other once he rang the doorbell. I was wearing a transparent lingerie set with a caftan that showed almost everything. We both started making wild love and dashing every wall on our way to the sofa. Our passion and desire for each other were undeniable as we lost ourselves in the moment, letting go of all inhibitions. The evening turned into a steamy and unforgettable night of pure bliss. Once we were done with our first round of sex and our stomachs were growling, we decided to eat some food and go on for another steamy session. I turned off the alarms and the doorbells as I did not want anyone to disturb us till late in the afternoon tomorrow. We moved our romance to our bedroom, where I decorated the entire room into a passionate honeymoon suite. It had handcuffs and other items that could help us enhance our experience for the night. As we indulged in our second round of passion, the room transformed into a haven of desire and intimacy. The night was filled with exploration and excitement as we continued to deepen our connection. Once we were done and exhausted, we made our way to the bathroom where I had prepared the bathtub with bath bombs and wine so that we could experience everything in just one night. I did not want to leave any of the experiences until next time. We were both in the bathtub, and Ray was arousing me in ways that James never did. I moaned with passion that I could never go back to James and his pathetic little body after all this that Ray made me feel. I knew at that moment that Ray was the one I truly desired, and I made a decision to end things with James once and for all. As we continued to enjoy our time together, I felt a sense of liberation and excitement for what the future held with Ray by my side. We were tired and then fell asleep after all that passionate love. I got up in the morning full of bliss from last night. When I looked around to find Ray, he was nowhere to be found. I thought that maybe he was in the bathroom and turned around and went back to sleep. I woke up after some time and still had no sign of Ray. I was about to get out of bed when I noticed James sitting at the edge of the bed waiting for me. I was shocked to see him come home so early, and the room was a mess while I was still naked. I knew that I was caught red-handed, and there was very little I could do to get out of this situation. I knew that he had already understood what had happened here last night, and maybe he even met Ray, and that was the reason he was missing. I quickly scrambled to cover myself and tried to come up with an explanation, but James just sat there in silence, his expression unreadable. I knew that I had some serious explaining to do, and that this situation was going to be difficult to navigate. I waited for James to start the conversation, as I had no clue when he got back. When James did not even say a word, I asked him the obvious question of when he got back home. He then started saying that he was back when I was enjoying my time in the bathtub with another man in a house that he had bought. He also heard the remark that I made about him and his body. He told me that if I hated him so much, then why was I even with him? Was it for the money that he earned? It was definitely not for our child, as I had already sent him away. I just wanted to use him for his money and enjoy it behind his back. I realized in that moment how selfish and manipulative I had been, using him for financial gain and taking advantage of his trust. It was a wake-up call for me to reflect on my actions and make amends for the hurt I caused. I also knew that he was the cause of all of this. I knew that at least now I should stand up for myself and tell him that all of this was his fault. If he had shown me a little more love and had been understanding of my feelings, then maybe I would not have been so desperate to find someone else who cared and loved me. I knew that everything was shattering, so there was no point holding myself back and letting James know exactly how he made me feel all these years so that he understood what I had been putting up with all these years. He was not a very easy person to live with. He always made sure to make me realize how small I was and how he was the one paying for all my comfort and luxuries, and that I should be grateful for him. I finally mustered the courage to stand up for myself and express my true feelings, even if it meant potentially ending the relationship. It was a liberating moment of self-empowerment that I knew I needed to embrace for my own well-being. He laughed after I was finished and said that our marriage was just an agreement that we both had to honor. There was never love, and we never expected that from each other right from the time that we were married. I was the one who started being more demanding of his time and affection as time went by, and he did not know how to deal with it. He started working extra hard to earn more money for my demands, and he did everything that he could to make sure that I had all the luxuries in the world, but I was still upset. He let me take charge of the house and the baby in my own way, without interfering, and still I was not happy. I then decided to make a complete change in my life and start working, forgetting everything about him and our son. He still put up with all of my tantrums and did not ask me about why I was doing what I was doing. I was too shocked to listen to his thought process of how he made me look like a bad person in all of this. We had a very big argument where we both started throwing things and blaming each other for the things we had done in our marriage. He then told me that he had had enough of a selfish and ungrateful person like me and wanted me to leave his house immediately. He said that I had no right over anything that he had bought since it belonged to him. He demanded that I pack my things and leave, making it clear that our marriage was over. The hurtful words he said made me realize that our relationship had reached a breaking point. He mocked me that since my lover had a great body and was good at sex, maybe he will give me some place in his bed that too naked. I knew that there was no point in arguing with James right now. I called Ray, but his call went straight to voicemail. I did not know what to do, but I knew that I could not stay with James in the same room for even a single second now. I packed a bag and left the house, needing space to process everything that had just happened. As I drove away, tears streaming down my face, I knew that this was the end of my marriage to James. I kept trying to reach Ray while trying to figure out where I needed to drive to, but there was no answer. I wondered if James had threatened him, or was he in some kind of problem that he was unavailable. I decided to drive to the gym and maybe try to find him there. I had no luck with Ray, so I crashed over at one of my colleagues' houses for the night. The next day at work, I was unable to focus thinking about the events from last night. I soon received a call from my son's boarding school that his bags were packed and when I was coming to pick him up. I was surprised at this sudden news and asked what had happened. They told me that his father had decided to take him out of school and that I would be coming to pick him up. I told them that it was a misunderstanding and to let him be at school. I quickly called James, who picked up after a few tries. I asked him why he was involving our son in all of these. He told me that he was not very sure if he was actually our son. I was baffled at his allegations. He wanted me to take care of my son on my own now that I had a job. He wanted nothing to do with me or my son. I did not really understand if I was dreaming or if this was happening for real. How could James just ditch his own son when he was actually having problems with me? I told him that it was definitely his son, and he should not be dragging him into our mess. He asked me to come and sign mutual divorce papers, which mentioned that I did not want anything from James and would never ever try to meet our son ever in life. I just wanted to go separate ways and have nothing to do with any of them. I couldn't believe how heartless James was being, but I knew I had to prioritize my own well-being and move on from this toxic situation. Signing those papers would be like the first step towards a fresh start for me with my lover, is what James told me. He said that no lover would want to get kids in their passionate sex life, which he was sure would not last for more than 6 months. I knew he was mocking me, but I also knew that right now, all I needed to do was think of a solution to keep my son at school. I went to meet James at home and asked him what he wanted me to do so that we could start over again. He said that he does not like making the same mistakes again and again in life. All he wanted was me to be out of his life, which meant that I should be out of our son's life as well. He said that it was the only way he could take revenge from me. He knew that breaking this marriage would not affect me as much as not being able to see my son or talk to him, which was very true. That is exactly what he wanted from me, or else he was willing to ruin my son's life. I had no choice but to sign those papers to secure a bright future for my son. It was a difficult decision, but I knew that sacrificing my own happiness was worth it to protect my son. Despite the pain of losing my husband, I had to prioritize my son's well-being above all else. I am sitting on a park bench with tears in my eyes writing this down. I knew that I needed to let this out so that I can make sense of what I just did. I might be judged for being a bad wife, which I don't mind, but I truly love my son. I have no idea how I can even imagine my life without him. I now realize that maybe I should have just stayed with James with all the insults he threw at me. At least then I would still be able to see my son and talk to him. I am at a personal loss right now. I feel like I am going to lose my senses after such a drastic decision that I made. Maybe I could try harder and get back my son. He is old enough to choose to live with one of us. I don't know what to do anymore. My brain is shutting down and I feel like I have a rock on my heart. I need to find a way to communicate with James effectively and come up with a plan that prioritizes our son's well-being. It's important for me to stay strong and focused during this difficult time. At the same time, I also know that James would be able to provide him with a much better life than I ever could. Maybe I should just leave my son under James's care and start over. Thank you all so much for listening to such a long and boring story of my life. I know many people will judge me for not even being guilty of cheating on my husband, but it is true that I am not guilty about it. I am only guilty for leaving my son behind. I hope after reading all this, you all would understand what I had been through and why I did what I did. Hope to see some positives coming out of this post. Thank you again for taking time out to listen to me.